We are back, and we are joined by Mike Preisner, producer and co-writer of The Empire Files, who has done extensive work on one of the weirdest people in our political landscape, Tulsi Gabbard. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Hey, thanks for helping put me on the radar even more of the new director of national intelligence. Not worried about that at all.
You can get on the enemies list.
Are you on the enemies list, or are you too white man for that and not Muslim like Mehdi, I don't know what Mehdi's religion is, but that seems to be her bag. He was on the list.
I'm on the new enemies list. That enemies list was during her campaign. It was all the people that were like trolling her a lot, which I was not at the time. I had just done one podcast episode about her, but since then, I'm sure I've made it. But yeah, it's all fun and games until the person you're trolling gets put in charge of the CIA and 17 other spy agencies.
Yeah, that's gonna be rough. I mean, I think she's gonna get confirmed. Like, there's a lot of creeps. Gates, it's up in the air. Hegseth, now there's this detailed sexual assault allegation in the police report. But with her, they might just think, okay, she's another kind of deep state person that has some intelligence ties herself. Like, I guess, what's the harm?
Yeah, it's lucky for her that Gates and Hegseth are going to be sucking out all the oxygen out of the room. You know, I feel like the Democrats may focus on the people they feel they can most easily block the confirmation of to be able to claim some kind of victory by blocking one or two of them. And Tulsi may just be lower on that totem pole of people they think they can knock out, which, you know, I think is part of what made me interested in Tulsi in the first place, is the things that weren't covered about her versus the things that were. You know, all I have done in my, you know, the small reporting I've done on Tulsi is really just compiling the work that other investigative journalists have done. You know, people like Nick Grube at the Honolulu Civil Beat, Christine Graylow, independent journalist for Meanwhile in Hawaii, Peter Friedrich for the Caravan magazine. The New Yorker did a really great piece.
Carrie Howley, I return to that often. Yeah, where she profiled her.
Yeah, and so there's these things that kind of exist that have really kind of damning details that deserve a lot of scrutiny, but they never seem to be what's covered by the media, but by other politicians and all of that. You know, I think a great example is 60 Minutes just ran like this short piece where they went through Trump's cabinet of curiosities and gave like a quick, like, here's why each of these people are bad and should not be in the positions that Trump is appointing them for. And then they said one thing about Tulsi, and the one thing they said about Tulsi to, you know, discredit her in the eyes of the viewers was that she wanted to pardon Edward Snowden, which is, you know, right. But it's like, of all the other things out there, it's like, why is that the thing that you're going to focus on? And so, yeah, I've always been kind of confused as to why the things that they really could go after her for, you know, the really, I think the really damning things, you know, is just kind of usually omitted. I mean, maybe partially that's because it was ignored when the Democrats were promoting her as a rising star, and now they'd have to indict themselves by now talking about that stuff. But yeah, it never gets the coverage it deserves. I mean, maybe hopefully now that she's under more scrutiny, but so far I haven't really seen it.
We just have breaking news that Matt Gaetz has withdrawn himself from Attorney General consideration as of 5 minutes
More
ago.
time to focus on Tulsi.
Woo!
Yeah, bad news for Tulsi.
Yes, exactly. So let's get right to it, and I'm sure we'll be updating everybody on that breaking story later on. But for those who may not be familiar with this character's political trajectory, how did she get into Congress? What's her background? And how did she get into Trump's orbit?
Yeah, I mean, to know the story, you really have to talk about the Science of Identity Foundation, which is the religious organization she grew up in. Many ex-members have called it a cult. Many of those ex-members have talked to the press, and there's some really damning stuff in there. The Science of Identity Foundation is run by a white surfer guy named Chris Butler, who is deemed himself a messenger of God, a direct messenger of God. And so all of his disciples believe that he is, you know, God's messenger on earth and kind of worship him. And he has people who serve him and do his chores and things like that. But, you know, I'm not disparaging anyone for being part of a religious or spiritual community that's like that. You know, people are totally free to do that kind of stuff, and I don't hate on any of those people. But the thing about Science of Identity is it has had a wing of a political project. For Tulsi's entire life since she was a baby, Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation have tried to get their members into positions of power, into politics. Tulsi Gabbard's parents are two of those people, very close to Chris Butler in his inner circle. They have both achieved political office in Hawaii as part of this project, and several other Science of Identity members, many of them have ran, but some of them have actually gotten into local politics. But they never achieved politics on a national stage. Tulsi was very much groomed for that because she was a part of her father's and her mother's and Butler's political organizing project, even when she was a teenager, appearing in anti-gay ads, helping her dad organize, patriotic groups. They had all these weird little political projects that were aimed at building a political career for their members. And so when she ran, for local office in Hawaii, both at this, kind of the local state level, and then for Congress, this is something that had been built by people in the organization, for a long time. And so when she wanted to run for Congress, she was doing this in a very blue state. And the thing about Science of Identity is they have very right-wing politics when it comes to LGBTQ people, when it comes to women's choice. In particular, a hatred of Muslims, like a deep, deep hatred of Muslims, is very much a part of that ideology.
We can return to that. Yeah.
Yes, which we absolutely should, because that's going to play a lot into actually her role as the head of the DNI, in kind of like a post 9/11 style, Bush era shit. But when she was trying to run for Congress with these clearly coming from a very right-wing background, and she had been on the record in the state legislature talking about homosexual extremists and things like that. But you can't really win Congress in Hawaii if you have those right-wing views. I mean, it's like the bluest state in the United States. And so she did a kind of rebrand where she really leaned into, I am a Hindu woman of color veteran, and I am now progressive on gay rights and women's choice and things like that. And then she just very quickly ascended. I mean, as soon as she got elected into Congress, she was given all these heights. She was a speaker at the Democratic National Convention that year. She got put as a co-chair of the DNC, and she got put on these commissions, things like that. So she got really very quickly promoted by the party because she was very much considered a rising star in the party. And so through her time in Congress, I mean, she kind of played that game where she kind of acquiesced to what she needed to be in the Democratic Party, but then started to assert her own politics a little more. I think most notably, she was the one person in the Democratic Party who was calling out Obama for not calling out radical Islamic extremism. And so the anti-Muslim views that she was raised with started to show there. And then, we've seen where her career went since then, bouncing from thing to thing to see what would get her higher and higher into power. And that's how she ended up. She was a Bernie supporter, then a Trump supporter. All of these kind of acts of a political chameleon were to what was advantageous at the time to get the biggest audience and the most amount of people. And so I think that's the reason it deserves scrutiny, is because if someone just has a weird or unconventional religious background, that shouldn't be up for scrutiny. But the fact that Science of Identity very clearly has a political project, if they want to get people in office, it means they have a political agenda. But we don't know what that political agenda is. We can read into some of it with Tulsi's positions, but we don't actually know why Chris Butler wants his members to be in positions of power. But there is a reason, because they've been trying very hard to do that. So we should have the right to know, I think.
Absolutely. Although you will be called Hindu-phobic by her followers, which I think was a real thing back in 2019 when she began to pivot towards a more right-wing position. Although when she ran for president, basically she did one thing, was she went after Kamala Harris on the debate stage and then swiftly dropped out and endorsed Biden. And it had this heartfelt endorsement where she spoke about how she served with Bo and she knows he's a man of character. And within less than 4 years, she's clearly on the MAGA train, and the left her. It's the same old shtick. But the Chris Butler thing is just the obviously this incredibly meaty piece that the rest of the media hasn't dove into. He's still alive, Butler?
He's still around. He actually did a very rare interview with the New Yorker back when she was running for president in 2019. Although, you won't see the Hindu phobic stuff as much anymore because as part of her rebrand to MAGA people, she has really put a lid on that stuff. Yeah, it used to be first Hindu member of Congress, sworn in on the Bhagavad Gita. That was very much a part of her identity when she was a Democrat. That's actually why I was a little surprised that she got the nomination, because I guess, overestimated how much Christian nationalists were really a part of Trump's inner workings, and that seeing someone like Gabbard, who clearly is not a Christian, but then tried to rebrand recently and started talking about Jesus a lot more. Her memoir, which I read, really tries to say, actually, it was the Bible that was read most in my house. And actually, I kind of was more of a Christian, was kind of her narrative in her book. So really kind of switching from her past characterization of her spiritual background. And so, yeah, I think that all the people that were accusing you of being Hindu phobic back during that time, or likely all members of the Science of Identity Foundation who were tasked with going online and arguing with these people. That's what that list, the enemies list. These are all Science of Identity members who were, volunteer work or mandatory service of going out and encountering people online. But yeah, I think they want to downplay the Hindu stuff now quite a bit.
Well, because obviously, as you've said, the whole goal is about getting into power. So, Chris Butler, can you talk about the history of this cult? I know he's a guru, and essentially it's an offshoot of the Hare Krishnas, which obviously had their own internal issues back when that was exploding in the late 60s and 70s. But who is he? What are the core beliefs of this cult? And how high up is Tulsi and her family in this particular organization?
Yeah, well, Butler, as a young guy, was a follower of it's called ISKCON. It's the International Center of Krishna Consciousness or something. And so the Hare Krishnas, which, some people may recognize or have them in their town or something. When the leader of ISKCON died, there was all these splits, and then different people declared themselves gurus and then had their own flock of disciples. And Butler was one of those people. So as a young guy, he basically said in a split from the Hare Krishna group he was in, I actually am the true messenger of God, none of these other guys. And so he developed a small group of people around him that believed he was the messenger of God, and then they just grew and grew. And then they're financed by a lot of businesses that members have. There's, potentially some shady stuff there. But now they have quite a lot of money and financing. I think they're one of their front groups in Australia. They have a large number of people in Australia. They have over $40 million in the bank of one of their yoga nonprofits or something like that. So it has a significant amount of money. They have perhaps thousands of members. They've sent missions to different countries. And so they have reach outside of the United States, definitely outside of Hawaii. But I think one of the things that characterizes, but outside of just the, I'm the true messenger of God thing, is that And the thing is I've also talked directly to ex-members of Science of Identity. None of them wanted to go on the record because they really fear reprisal because, Christine Graylow, one of those journalists, was followed and harassed by Science of Identity members. According to her, they use the same law firm that Scientology uses. And so there's a lot of fear among ex-members to talk about their experiences. But one of the things is that the indoctrination, it's not just that Butler is this spiritual leader, but the anti-gay bigotry is really central. And ex-members I talk to say that, you listen to these tapes all the time of Chris Butler giving his spiritual lectures. And there's different levels of these tapes that go deeper and deeper into the ideology. And there's one level that's just pure anti-gay bigotry. And so, there's people that have spoken to this publicly, ex-members, but also people that I've talked to say that, as children growing up, you just listen at bedtime to these lectures of Chris Butler, which include extremely, as they describe it, extremely pornographic descriptions of gay sex in a way to disgust you and say how horrible and disgusting this is. So that's kind of a strange thing to be wrapped into
It's called Hindu, grooming in some circumstances.
Yeah, I feel like that's not something you want to expose small children to. And then another part of it is just anti-Muslim hatred. And there's been definitely clips of Butler talking about this stuff. And that's something that we've seen kind of play into Tulsi's ideology as well. And so, ex-members say that the Butler is a very mean, narcissistic guy who has all these servants, bringing him food, doing his chores, kissing his feet, things like that. He will get very mad at you and punish you if you do your chores wrong and things like that. So just kind of typical cult stuff that you hear from other people. But I think what's unique about it is like the political angle, that Butler has some kind of political agenda that is driven mainly by hatred of gay people and hatred of Muslims, and that has tried to put people in positions of power to, I don't know, carry out that agenda or some other agenda that we don't actually know about.
And you mentioned on your show, I listened to your review, a bit of it, of her book, and how she's always in white, and she's in white on her on the cover, which is has something to do with Butler. Like, if you could just flesh out how much of her public persona fits very neatly into these specific cult requirements in a way that most people are not going to pick up on.
Yeah, well, one thing I didn't answer is like, what is Tulsi's position in this organization? And that's she's like in Butler's inner circle, or at least her family always has been, and Tulsi has been. Even her two husbands, her ex-husband and her current husband, are people like Gabbard. They are the children of science of identity royalty. So her first husband, his parents, very close to Butler. Her ex-father-in-law actually ran Chris Butler's weird boarding school in the Philippines, which you got to wonder, why do you put a boarding school for children in the Philippines and not in the state that you live in the United States? Probably it's a lot easier to get away with weird shit and things that wouldn't fly at a school in the United States. You can probably get away with it in the Philippines. So Tulsi's ex-father-in-law was like the headmaster of the school in the Philippines. Her current husband, his mom is high up in science of identity and very close to the Butler family and Butler's wife. And Tulsi Gabbard's parents are that as well, are very, very close to Butler. And so, clearly, Tulsi's upbringing has been close to Butler, and her family, her spouses, all kind of in this inner Butler circle. And, when you mentioned like her outfit, like Chris Butler, that's his outfit. He wears all white. That's what he wears. He's only seen in all white because he's a messenger of God, and that's looks good if you're in all white and you're a messenger of God. It fits. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that that's kind of Tulsi's trademark outfit is the all white, which would indicate, there's still some degree of relationship there. And then, in that New Yorker piece in 2019, and 2020 for that presidential campaign, she doesn't deny that she's still very close to Butler. In fact, in that a story where she lets the New Yorker journalist get close to her and talk to Butler, she literally showed like a tree of like a family tree of religious leaders with Butler being the new messenger of God. And so she has not denied, she very much downplays this connection, but she definitely hasn't said, oh yeah, this is a thing when I was younger and I'm no longer a part of it. And so we can only wonder where it is now, but these are the questions that are not being asked of her.
Right. And her staff, can you talk a bit more about how she staffed her campaigns and almost congressional positions with members of this Science of Identity Foundation as well?
Yeah. I mean, that's another indicator there as well. I mean, I think that's also from the New Yorker piece, is that people running her campaign, people staffing her office were members of Science of Identity Foundation. There's also a really good story in the Honolulu Civil Beat about how a lot of campaign funds were actually going to Science of Identity members' businesses that didn't actually do anything. And so there's this, potential laundering of campaign money just directly to high-ranking Science of Identity members, website businesses that didn't actually do anything. And so there's clear links there, which are kind of there for anyone to see, but for some reason doesn't get looked at hard enough.
And the Islamophobic and hatred of Muslims piece, when she was a Democrat, she was going on Fox News quite frequently to accuse Obama of being too soft on terror by not saying the words radical Islamic extremism. This is one of these news cycles that maybe gets memory hold for people, but it was like a month-long obsession and fit into the racist narrative about Obama himself with the Barack Hussein Obama emphasis. So if you could give us a better sense of her views on this and how it informs her foreign policy.
Yeah. And so this, she somehow has this label as like a peace politician,
Right.
an anti-interventionist and all. Yeah. And I never really understood where that came from. I mean, if you look at the U.S. is at war in a lot of places, Africa, Asia, Middle East, all over the place. I think Tulsi opposes one current U.S. military intervention, and that's the proxy war in Ukraine.
Exactly.
That's one. All the rest of them, she either supports or is more hawkish on. And I think this really comes back to this, her anti-Muslim views. She has always that's the one thing she didn't compromise when she was doing her chameleon thing to be in the Democratic Party. And if all of the attention she gets, like the biggest thing that's leveled against her is that she's a lover of dictators because she praises Putin and she met with Assad, right? And this has been interpreted by the mainstream media as she just loves dictators and authoritarians, and that's why she does this stuff. But really, when you look into it, if you look at all of her tweets praising Russia, it's all about Russia bombing al-Nusra and ISIS. If you look at her meeting with Assad, it's all about this is a Christian government fighting a Muslim insurgency. So Tulsi's position on Russia...
Modi, right? Her support for Narendra Modi is because he represses the Muslim minority in the country?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so, yes, these love of dictators are really the love of people who she sees as partners in the global war on terror, which she says herself she is a hawk on. And so I think this is one of the dangers of her being in a position in U.S. foreign policy and specifically overseeing spy agencies. The CIA and the FBI did so much horrible damage to the Muslim community in America after 9/11. I mean, there was not a mosque in America you could go into without FBI informants, trying to entrap young Muslim teenagers into saying something provocative and to be thrown away in jail. I mean, the level of surveillance and entrapment was really horrific and terrible. So now someone who is very much in line with that ideology, being in charge of the spy agencies, that number one is bad. But when you have someone who he has this anti-interventionist label, right? But we know calls herself a hawk in the war on terror and is to the right of the government on attacking Iran and Lebanon and Palestine and Yemen. All of a sudden, at a moment where we are on a brink of regional war, I mean, arguably are involved in a regional war at the moment, and then we're having someone come in who somehow is labeled this isolationist, non-interventionist, but who very much would want to escalate these conflicts. I think that's very dangerous, both from the domestic perspective of who is going to be spied on in our own country and own communities, but also who is going to be in Trump's ear with extremists like Hegseth and others who think that we actually need to be more aggressive when it comes to, fighting radical Islamic extremism around the world, some of whom, according to her definition, have state power in these countries that the U.S. is currently bombing or sanctioning or doing other things to.
And lastly, Mike, can you just shed some light on her role in the military in and of itself? Because I know that you mentioned U.S. intervention or U.S. war and operations in Africa. Didn't she just come back from doing from her time over there, where I believe she's actually involved in some kind of information warfare subset of the military, if I'm not mistaken? Yeah,
that would be psychological operations, which
there you go.
Is usually not a good phrase to say. But yeah, no, she has a long career. She's a lieutenant colonel in the reserves. That's, she's two more promotions and she's a general. So there's only one more rank to go above that where you're not a general. So that's a high position of power. That's why I didn't buy any of this shit. Her saying that she's on a terror watch list. She gets followed on the airplane and stuff. There's no way that Tulsi doesn't have a top secret security clearance to be in that position. I mean, if you are a commander of a battalion that is a special operations PSYOPs battalion, the only way she doesn't have a security clearance is if every time she walks in a command center, they have to take down all the maps that are hanging up, because all that stuff in that setting is classified. I mean, there's no way that she is able to be in that position without a security clearance. And so I don't think you can have a security clearance and be on a terror watch list. So that story never seemed to make sense to me. But yeah, no, she has a long career in the military. I mean, she, before she joined the military, her and her dad started some kind of pro-America organization after 9/11 to support the military. She joined at a young age, like I did. But she kind of continued to pursue not just a military career, but like conflict zones. I think it's really interesting. People who don't know a lot about the Army, but Tulsi was in a medic position on her first tour. She reclasses to a different job into military police, which is at that time was like one of the roles where women were very often in combat in the early years of the Iraq War. So she joins as a military police officer, gets deployed to Kuwait and not another combat zone. But then she, left the National Guard and went into the reserves based in California to take a command position and a promotion in this special operations PSYOPs unit that she's done at least one deployment, that we know of, to Africa, which she was very proud of fighting radical Islamic terrorists there. And so, it always never really fit. That's why I was always skeptical from the beginning of her anti-war brand, because she not only remained in the military, but very clearly pursued places that would put her in combat zones and jobs that would kind of escalate her role as being a functionary of this war machine. And so those two things, never really drive. It makes sense if you're like an anti-war veteran. You're like, I've been there. I think it's wrong. That's why I got out. But to continue trying to rise through the ranks. And again, it kind of mirrors her political career, right? Where she has always pursued power and promotions in the military and in her political world. And I think the question people should be asking is, why does she want that power? Is it just because she is ambitious, or is there some kind of deeper motives? And the more you look into her background, the more you think there may be some deeper motives there.
Absolutely. Well, Mike Prasner, really appreciate your time today, producer and co-writer of the Empire Files. Thanks so much for giving us a deep dive on this. Really appreciate it.
Anytime.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.